Right, apologies for the slightly late start. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Cheltenham Borough Council's Licensing Subcommittee, which is being held today, Wednesday, the 4th of October 2023. My name is Councillor Dr. David Willingham, and I'm Chair of the committee. This meeting is being streamed live to YouTube and is being recorded for training purposes. If there are any breaks in the transmission to the YouTube stream, the meeting will be adjourned for a short period of time until any issues are resolved. A number of speakers in favour of the application tonight have requested not to be filmed. So for those watching via webcast, there will only be audio during this part of the hearing. The recording of the meeting will be held on the Council's YouTube channel for 4 years. Please also be aware that CCTV and audio recording is now in operation, and the footage and recording of that will be held by the Council for 5 months. A fire alarm is not planned, but if it does sound, please follow officers or leave via the exits marked with green signs, which are there and there. And the point to meet is on the War Memorial outside the municipal offices. If you have a mobile phone, or anything else that makes beeping sounds, could you please switch it to silent so it doesn't disturb the meeting? With that, I will move on to agenda item number 1. Apologies for absence. There are none. Declarations of interest. I am not seeing any. So we move on to agenda item 3, which is an application for a variation to an existing sexual entertainment venue licence. So because this is a regulatory item, members must be present and have heard the proceedings in their entirety to vote on it. We will ensure that the applicant and the applicant's representative, if they have one, are present in the meeting. We will also make sure that the objectors are here and present in the meeting as well. I will ask the licensing officer to introduce the report. Members will get an opportunity to ask the licensing officer questions. The objectors will get opportunity to ask the licensing officer any questions arising from the report, as will the applicant or their representative. Objectors will be given an opportunity to speak. We will ask you to try and limit the amount of time you speak to no more than 5 minutes. And we would also ask people not to repeat points that have been made by other people. The applicant or their representative will be given an opportunity to present their case. And for balance, the timings that the applicant will get will be effectively similar to the sum total of those in objection, because of the need to rebut various issues if they wish to do that. Members can ask both the objector and the applicant's questions after they've given their they've clarified their objections or their statement. There is no cross-examination, so you can't ask each other questions. Members will then debate the matter. The applicant will be given a final right of reply. We will read the resolution we're voting on. We will go to the vote. So there are a number of public speakers, and the list has changed from what I've got in front of me, but on this page, but we will ensure that everybody gets heard from. With that, could I please invite the licensing officer to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jason Kirkwood. I'm the team leader of the licensing team. This is an application for a variation of an existing sexual entertainment venue licence in the name of European Events Consultants Limited. The application was received on the 14th of August 2023 and is for a variation to an existing licence that was started to be enforced from the 7th of February 2023 to the 6th of February 2024. The existing licence covers various dates around March Race Week, and this application is to vary that current licence to add the Friday, the Saturday and the early hours of Sunday for the Cheltenham Racecourse November meeting, and the hours that are being requested are within the report, but effectively 8 p.m. until 5 a.m. the following day on those 3 days. Once a decision is made by this committee, any applicant who is refused the licence may, within 21 days of being notified of the refusal, appeal to the local magistrates' court. There is not a right of appeal to any other party in the process under this legislation, unless that was to be through judicial review or something similar, but I can't see any grounds, any normal appeal route. Just some background. On the 1st of October 2014, this council approved the adoption of Schedule 3 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982 to take effect from the 14th of December. And since that adoption, where relevant entertainment takes place in the borough, then it needs to be authorised under a sexual entertainment venue licence, an SEV licence. Relevant entertainment is described under 2.3 in the report. But it must also be noted under 2.4 that this type of entertainment can be provided on an infrequent basis as per the legislation, which effectively means that on no more than 1 day per month, this entertainment can be provided in a venue without the need for an SEV licence. So one of the points that's been discussed previously around Race Week is the potential that entertainment could go between various venues to remain available throughout the particular event concerned. In determining this application, our members must have regard to representations from the police and any other comments that have been made. The application is consulted with the police on, and they had no comments to make on the application. In addition, we agreed with a local representative body, Grassac, to give them notice that the application had been made, just so that they were aware of this application and obviously could comment if they wished. We've built up a good constructive relationship with Grassac, I think, and that's part of that. Members are to note in particular that any objection must relate to both or either of the mandatory or discretionary grounds for refusal. There is the comment, objections made on moral grounds or values are not relevant to either mandatory or discretionary grounds, but obviously, as we pick up later in the report, we do talk about the public sector equality duty. We had 15 objections and 11 emails of support in relation to the application, and those are included at Annexes 1 and 2. The mandatory grounds for refusal of an application are laid out at 4.4. The discretionary grounds for refusal are laid out at 4.5. And we talk about location of premises, properties with sensitive locations, etc. There's quite a lot of information in the report which I won't go through because you're all obviously able to digest that in your own time, and we'll ask any questions if you need to. But if we look at section 6 of the report, which discusses the public sector equality duty, the public sector equality duty places a statutory duty on the council in the exercise of its functions to have due regard to the need to do the things laid out at A to C, which is eliminate discrimination, harassment, victimisation, and any other conduct that is prohibited by or under the Act, advance equality of opportunity between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic, and foster good relations between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic. Obviously, there's quite a lot of information there, and anyone who's engaged with this process in the past will be aware of some of that information and the PSED. However, something that's not been considered at these hearings to any, well, it hasn't been considered at all prior to this hearing, was the High Court case in February 2023. And as you'll realise, obviously the last time this matter was considered was on the 1st, this application was considered on the 1st of February. In February 2023, there was the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council case, which talked about policy. Obviously, everyone who's involved with this hearing will take something away from that, I'm sure, but you do need to obviously bear in mind that that case talks about the setting of policy and the processes, the steps that the council went through in dealing with that. It talks about PSED, but you do just need to bear that in mind. And obviously, when you look at some of the information that's come out of that case, you do just need to bear that in mind. The two processes of determining an application and setting a policy are different, and the consultation processes are different. A consultation process to set a policy should be something that's quite interactive, whereas the process of consultation on an application, there's a slightly different slant to that, which I'm sure everyone will be conscious of. I've tried to provide as much information as I can about that case anyway for everyone's information and knowledge. When determining the application, the council obviously must have regard to the basics. It must have regard to the relevant legislation, to the statutory guidance, to our adopted policy, to any relevant guidance issued by the Home Office, and obviously it must have regard to any comments that have been made for objection or letters of support. In particular, the council must bear in mind that its grounds for refusing an application potentially seem less restricted than for the grant of a new or renewal application. The legislation does seem silent on the specific grounds that we can engage when we're looking at a variation, which isn't particularly helpful because you're not really sure if that's been something that the draftsperson for this legislation has intended or if it's just a slip of the pen, as it were. However, one would assume that the grounds considered as relevant should relate to the statutory purpose of this legislation and promote public protection in line with the grounds for the consideration of new and renewal applications, insofar as they relate to an existing licence. Moreover, the committee should consider the public sector equality duty and ultimately act in the public interest. The council does not take a moral stand in relation to the operation of sexual entertainment and recognises that Parliament has made this a lawful activity, and we do all need to bear that in mind. We do also need to bear in mind that this activity is permitted without the control and the regulation that a licence can provide, as I've said already, with this exemption that's allowed for premises to provide it once a month as they choose. Furthermore, as I've said, the committee must be mindful of the public sector equality duty, and the committee is reminded of this point in objections about the application and must consider this duty in respect of the application. 7.5 talks about, obviously, this application is outside the designated permitted area, and there is just a slight question off that point. Obviously, the council's policy is to not grant applications in this area, and if the committee does decide to grant this variation, it should give some reference to that point, because obviously, notwithstanding there is an existing licence that's been granted, it's obviously extending that existing licence, and obviously that might not have been foreseen when the licence was originally granted. Having considered all these matters, the committee must decide whether to grant the variation application as applied for, grant the application subject to any additional terms, conditions and/or restrictions that are specific to the licence or standard conditions, or refuse the application. That's my report. I would also like to apologise to anyone who was a party to the original application. It only became apparent today that I'd not sent the notification of that decision out to anyone. The only thing I would say about that is, in my defence, I'm very, very sorry that that was the case, but actually there are no grounds for any other party than the applicant to actually appeal. So no one was prejudiced by that, and I will be sending out a decision notice to those parties that were party to that particular process. And that's my presentation, unless anyone has any questions.
Thank you. So firstly, are there any questions to our licensing officer from councillors? Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions for the licensing officer. Do you want me to just ask them one at a time? Yeah. Okay, firstly, have any complaints been brought to the licensing officer or licensing team from performers at this venue in the past?
I became the sort of lead officer in respect of SEVs probably 18 months or so ago, and I'm not aware of any in that time frame since I've been taking the lead on it. Prior to that, I can't really say. Obviously, I don't know how far back we might have had some concerns raised with us or not, but not in the 18 months or so I've been leading on these cases.
Okay, that probably answers the next question, because I was going to say during the past few years, the venue has been providing sexual entertainment under the exemption. Have there been any problems or complaints from the police about this venue?
I'm not aware of any complaints from the police, and I would like to think if there were any, they would have raised those, obviously, when the original application was made. In terms of whether the venue was used previously under the exemption, that's obviously something the applicant can clarify.
And just for clarification's sake, have there been any concerns raised about, or issues raised about discrimination or inequality regarding either the applicant or the venue?
Again, in the 18 months or so that I've been dealing with these applications, I'm not aware of any specific allegations or complaints against the applicant or any of the particular venues that I've had dealings with, which would be the Two Pigs in that time frame, this venue and the Gin Distillery venue in Cambridge Place.
Any other members with questions? So I've just got one, which is to just clarify the effect of the exemption. So effectively, if we were not to licence this and the exemption went ahead, can I just clarify that it's correct that the applicant wouldn't require a licence to host the activity at this premises on one night and a different premises on the second night, but both of those would go ahead without any licensing conditions in regard of an SEV licence? Is that correct, and is there anything else you want to expand on that?
I can probably make it a little bit clearer by not specifically referring to this particular venue and say that whether this licence is granted or not, any venue in Cheltenham or in any other town in the country could put on an evening of this type of entertainment. It could do that once a month throughout the year if it so chose. If you had an event going on across a series of days in that particular town, whether it be Cheltenham or somewhere else, then that operation could move from venue A to take advantage of the exemption to venue B to take advantage of the exemption to venue C and D. And believe it or not, there is actually the level of control on these types of licences is you know, people will obviously have different perspectives on this, but is quite high. You'll see in terms of the standard conditions that the council has produced, they are very detailed. They go into an awful lot of information in respect of managing that venue that will be regulated. These venues will probably, where they are licensed, will be visited possibly, well, at least once an evening through the course of them being open. And there is no other area of licensing where we visit venues that are licensed by us on such a level of such a high level of frequency. On the converse side of that, so that's the venue with the license, potential license. The venue that doesn't have the license, that decides to take advantage of the exemption, A, doesn't have to tell the police, B, doesn't have to tell us, and C, can go ahead and do what they wish and take advantage of the exemption. With no conditions, no additional provision, no additional regulation, no additional control. Potentially, we might only find out about that the following day. And obviously, so the opportunity to go into a venue, visit the premises, possibly speak to performers, speak to the staff that are working in that venue is just entirely different. And it's very easy to say, but we do have to bear that in mind. That is a really serious consideration. If we don't have a licensed venue and we have venues that aren't licensed, the degree of control and regulation is entirely different.
Thank you. Are there any further member questions? No. Okay. Are there any questions seeking clarification of the report from any of the objectors? If you've got any questions, if you raise your hand, not seeing any hands raised. So if I ask whether the applicant has got any questions and anything, no. Okay. Thank you. So before I ask the objectors to speak, I'd just like to make a few things clear. So firstly, your verbal representations tonight are to expand on and clarify your written representations. You can't use this as an opportunity to seek to introduce new evidence, as the applicant won't have had an opportunity to review it, and that would mean they didn't have their right to a fair hearing. Secondly, while people might disagree on matters, I would ask everyone to do so with courtesy and respect, specifically using non-pejorative language such as premises to describe the location, SEV or licensable activity to describe what's being licensed, and applicant, performer, dancer or employee to describe people who work there in various capacities. And finally, I want to just address a couple of matters that have been raised in the written objections. So this is an application for a sexual entertainment venue licence. There's no evidence whatsoever that prostitution occurs on site, nor that any performer is involved in such activities at the premises. There are licensing conditions to prevent the exchange of contact details between performers and customers. There's also no evidence that anyone is coerced, trafficked or the victim of modern slavery, and the applicant has robust checks in place to prevent this. There is a licensing condition requiring the provision of materials to make performers aware of these issues. Should you raise these issues in your clarification, I will interrupt you, not to prevent your freedom of speech, but because this is not an environment where privileged speech is possible, and there would be a significant likelihood that you would be defaming either the applicant or performers. Since the objections are anonymised, it would be helpful to the committee if you could identify your objection by number when you start speaking, just so we can make sure we're looking at the correct document, correct representation in our document bundle. So with that, I've now got a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 speakers. As I say, I would ask people to try and limit their representations to 5 minutes. There will be some flexibility, but there are a lot of people that wish to speak tonight. And please, if someone said something previously, try to avoid repeating it. So with that, if I could ask Joe Surma to address the committee, please.
Sorry, I was just checking which number I was. Thank you for letting me speak this evening. I'm number 2 on the objections, and I speak on behalf of myself as a long-term Cheltenham resident, and I'm also the co-coordinator of the Three Counties branch of the Women's Right Network. So I will try and keep it brief, I promise. But first and foremost, my main objection is that it's, as been mentioned, outside of the designated permitted area. So the council itself has said that we're a relatively small urban borough, it's predominantly residential, and that the authority has resolved it's inappropriate to licence SEVs in or in the vicinity of, amongst others, residential areas. And it is the authority's policy, therefore, that there is no locality outside of the designated permitted area in which it would be appropriate to licence an SEV. Accordingly, the appropriate number of SEVs for outside of the designated permitting area is 0. So while the licence was granted in February 2023, despite being outside the designated permitted area, I do question if it would have been granted if the November dates had been included in the initial application. It does feel to me personally like an attempt to move towards a sexual entertainment venue being opened during every single Cheltenham race meet, not just the march, which could potentially move it then to a permanent fixture. It may sound like objection, but looking at the Eroticats website, it does quote that they will be open for the Open, the International Festival Trial Day, the April meeting and New Year's Day racing. So I do feel like it's a legitimate concern. For those who aren't racegoers, this would cover the showcase in October, the Open in November, the International December, Festival Trial Day January, and April, which obviously is the race week, and then New Year's Day, self-explanatory. I'm not sure how further operational days of an SEV would affect Cheltenham's purple flag status, of which we are obviously all proud to have, especially given that they did praise the Cheltenham's Guardians scheme, who have said that they were overrun during March race meeting, with people needing their support in the evenings. I will keep it brief and I will skip these bits because I'm sure other people will mention them later. But as I say, I could talk extensively about the risks posed to women and girls due to the behaviour seen in town during the March race week, but I appreciate that that would class possibly as a moral objection rather than thinking of it as safeguarding issues. But I will say I reached out to our local MP, Alex Chalk, for his opinion on this licence, and he did come back to me with a very supportive email, which he has said that he is happy for me to read. So, with that being said, he said that he has been very clear that I strongly oppose the granting of SEV licences in Cheltenham and have done so consistently since I became MP. They harm local businesses, attract antisocial behaviour and can create an intimidating atmosphere. In my view, the time has come to stop such venues opening in Cheltenham altogether. This is purely his words, I haven't altered it in any way. So some councillors have claimed that their hands are tied when it comes to SEV licences, and the moral objections are not a basis for rejection. I'm afraid that this is misleading, and it is not the case that they can do nothing, and I have written to the Chair of Cheltenham Borough Council's Licensing Committee to set out the powers the Council has to take action if it wants to. In a letter responding to me, he dismissed those with concerns regarding SEVs as a minority with moral objections. I don't share that assessment. It is patronising and rather misunderstands the issue. I've been contacted by a number of constituents whose concerns are not moral, as they've been at pains to point out, but focused instead on the risk of harassment, the safety of women, and the impact on business. He says, turning to the application I mentioned specifically, I understand it is a variation from an existing licence, and the original licence was from February 23 to February 24, with permitted operating days during the March race week. However, the applicants are requesting a variation to include 2 nights in November to correspond with the November race meet. One thing that is most striking in the documentation is that it is clear that the existing licence was permitted even though outside of the council's own designated permitted area for events such as this. The documents say, it must be noted that this venue is situated out of that area, but that the authority decided to grant the original application, and it will therefore be for the committee to determine whether they believe that the increase in the number of days for this venue is relevant in the context of that decision. As the venue is outside of the permitted area, it seems to me there are strong grounds to object to an extension in the number of permitted operational days. Be that as it may, assuming you're speaking at the committee yourself, I'd be happy with you referencing my general objection to SEV licences, which is a matter of record, and then wishes me good luck with this hearing.
Thank you.
So, in summary, the request, I feel, shouldn't have standing in the first place, as the venue is outside of the designated planning area. And just because it has happened once doesn't mean it should happen again. That is a very slippery slope argument in all aspects of life. And I hope that the council will stand with me, a local mother, the Three Counties Women's Rights Network group, and also, therefore, Alex Chalk, the Secretary of State for Justice, in opposing this. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the licensing officer to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to comment just that obviously the committee has to be very careful when it's considering representations. This is a proper legal process and we have to ensure a fair hearing. The committee can obviously consider those comments in respect of the MP where they're related to your representation. So if they amplify and clarify the points that you've already made, any new information in there, I would ask the committee to disregard completely. Okay. If the MP wished to make a representation, he could have done that in his own right and he could have attended this evening. What he can't do is, once that objection period is closed, put his own representation into the mix outside of the time limit. Okay, no one else can do that, and an MP certainly can't. So I just wanted to flag that up. So it's just out of fairness, I just wanted to make it clear that obviously the members can consider the elements of that that are linked to your representation, where they amplify and clarify that. But beyond that, where he's gone beyond that, they have to disregard that.
Sorry, just to say, this is my first meeting of this type. I was unaware, so sorry if I've taken a step too far. That's my apologies.
I will just come back and say that so I have written to the MP. He has, as to the best of my knowledge, although objections are anonymous, to the best of my knowledge in the entire time that I have been here, we have never had an objection on parliamentary paper from the MP. He has never formally objected, despite the fact that he undoubtedly could. He is Secretary of State for Justice, and he is better placed to change this legislation than we are. So I'll try and address those comments later, but I think he may well have been a little bit disingenuous in what he has said to you, I think, but I will try and address that later. Right, if I could now move on to Sarah Panzetta, please.
Hello. Right, so my objection is number 7, and so I understand I'm meant to amplify and clarify. Yep. Basically, it seems like there's a tension between the council's duties to uphold the public sector equality duty, to reduce public nuisance, and the legal standing of these clubs. And I understand that, you know, this is the kind of balancing act that councillors are having to do. I was a bit rude about the police in my objection. I suggested that the lack of reporting was maybe connected to the complete collapse of women's trust in the police force, the effective decriminalisation of rape, the failure of police to support women who've been stalked. Yeah, I'm deeply unsurprised that there have not been any complaints submitted about the lap dancing club. That said, the police have done a good thing recently in that they have effectively banned both police officers and police staff from paying for sex. And I don't know where I meant to put this, I'm a newbie as well, but I kind of got a question here for councillors about whether this lead from the police is something that the council would consider, considering, you know, the reasons that the police did it was reasons around bribery and so on, which considering, you know, the role around licensing, it's very important that...
So I think I need to just, you're moving towards, so this is not paying for sex in the terms of prostitution, this is paying for sexual, so this is a lawful activity, and I just think yeah, and I think you may be moving into an area that's not covered by the what's being licensed. So this is purely licensable activity, not anything else that would not be lawful. Okay?
Okay. Licensing. Oops. Thank you. Moving back to the licensing. So I was interested to see in the officer's report, it mentions the Home Office guidance, and that in terms of licence conditions, obviously this is where you have some power. And so this is hours of opening and closing, displays and adverts, visibility of the interior, and any change of use from... But anyway, so those first three, the hours of opening, given what Joe's just said about it being, you know, a restaurant and so on, the hours of opening seem very generous. 6 p.m. to 5 a.m., just something maybe to consider. The displays, so we've got the bus going around Cheltenham. We've got the establishment itself with a great big banner outside. Something, again, in the council's, you know, under the licence conditions. So that was that bit. Yes, and in terms, I'm the one who emailed you because there was a document missing, because Stephen Burrows very helpfully sent various documents, but they seem to be a little bit brief, some of them. So there was like the refusal log, for example, where it's just a very brief document and there's no codes for what the refusal were, so a bit of an omission. And then also about there are no statistics. I was like, where's the rest? So that just feels like an omission. And there's also the document around the, what was it called? The rules for dancers, basically, the fees and so on, which wasn't like, you know, the 60 quid a night house fee, 25% of your earnings, so in all those conditions. Again, that wasn't shared with the committee and is maybe something, I don't know if that's something that falls under your remit.
Yep.
Yeah, just to come back on that quickly, obviously you emailed me today.
Hmm.
As soon as I
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, quite a busy day, but as soon as you emailed in, I tried to find out what the situation with that was. And obviously, it was on our website, but for some reason there wasn't a link, and that was something that was dealt with by Claire. I think she... No, yeah. So members do have access to it. It's just, yeah, it's apologies, but there were so many documents for this, that one went astray somehow.
Do you want to put the microphone on and just, we can get you to wrap up, please?
That's kind of it. Really, I've got questions. That's mainly, and I'm assuming that's a separate part, questions. Is that right? Or do I need to ask questions now?
The questions section was previously. So,
This is Amplify, really.
So the questions were after the officer presented the report to ask the officer. So if you want to just repeat the questions, and then we will try and get answers to them. But are they questions for the officer or questions for the applicant?
Kind of, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think it's a kind of joint question.
Okay, if you can read the questions out, and we will work out whether the officer should ask them or whether they are questions that the applicant may or may not choose to address during their representation.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so it's going back to the refusal log. So this is to do with Cheltenham Night Safe, which I understand is like a partnership between the police, council, blah, 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 blah. I was just wanting to, the applicant, I suppose, then to clarify how he's linking in with that, because that scheme looks quite decent in terms of barring dodgy characters and so on. So if you could clarify that.
If I let...
If there's anything about the operation itself, so whether it's engaged with Night Safe, any questions about the paperwork that's been submitted, then that's definitely in the ball court for the applicant. If there was anything about the process, if there was anything about the sort of legal side of it from the council's perspective, then that would come to me. But anything about the operation, any questions about what they would be doing, that's for them. And I'm pretty sure the comments you sent me earlier, I did forward those on about the refusals register in the code, I think.
Are there further questions? Okay. So I've just realised I omitted to go through, are there any member questions to a previous objector? So what I will do is, if I ask if there are any member questions for yourself, and then we'll go back. Are there any questions? No. Okay. Are there any questions for the previous objector either? Not seeing any. Okay. In which case, if I could ask the representative, what have I got here? It just says representative from Gloss Women to address the committee. And if you could ID the number of your representation as well, please.
Yeah, we were objection number 11. My intention is just to read a short statement on behalf of members of Gloucestershire Women's Liberation Collective, just amplifying our original objection. Gloucestershire Women's Liberation Collective would like to thank the Licensing Committee for this opportunity to contribute to this evening's meeting. We object to the application made by European Events Consultants Limited to vary their existing sexual entertainment venue licence to allow for lap dancing at Under the Prom. We note that our letter was one of an increasing number of objections expressing concern about the negative impact that sexual entertainment venues have on the lives of women and girls in Cheltenham. It seems clear that concern amongst the public is growing, and more people are joining the dots between the sexual objectification and commodification of women, which underpins the sex trade, the sexist and misogynistic attitudes that permeate society, and the endemic abuse and harassment of women and girls. Girl Guiding recently issued the results of the latest Girls' Attitude Survey, and sadly it makes for bleak reading. Girls' happiness is steadily declining, and more girls are reporting feeling anxious and worried. This is of no surprise when girls are dealing with increased levels of sexism, sexual harassment and abuse, both in public, in school and online. The evidence, and committee members will have no doubt engaged with the Safe and Equal Bristol report that we referenced in our original objection, as well as additional evidence that was provided by other objectors, showing the links between the harmful attitudes perpetuated by the sex trade, which includes lap dancing and stripping, and the negative impact that this has on the lives of women and girls is substantive and compelling. I was going to go on to quote some statistics from our own Race Week survey, which I did reference, well, we did reference in our original objection, but the stats that I was going to quote now weren't in my original objection, so I'm assuming that I can't quote those as they.
It's a bit unfair because the applicant can't then look at that to try and produce a rebuttal if that's what they wish to do.
Yeah, okay, I acknowledge that. What I will repeat, this was in our original objection, some of the comments that were made by women who responded to our own Race Week survey. And a number of women explicitly made a connection between the sexual entertainment venues and their Race Week experiences. And the comments included, and I quote, "Turning the pubs into strip clubs again only reinforces objectifying women." And again, I quote, "The sexual entertainment venues make the atmosphere really unpleasant and unsafe for women." We understand that our legal system is not agile enough to keep pace with the evidence and with shifts in public opinion, and unfortunately the operation of sexual entertainment venues still remains legal. However, as the licensing team leader highlighted in his report, the committee is not bound by licensing legislation at the expense of other statutory requirements. Namely, the licensing committee must take into account its statutory duties under the public sector equality duty. And I won't repeat those. I know the licensing team leader has already gone through those. We thank the licensing team leader for providing additional information about the recent judgment in the High Court as part of his report. We have no doubt that this judgment will be welcomed by committee members, given that it provides useful clarification that sex equality-based concerns should be fully considered as part of the public sector equality duty. We note that at the February committee, members acknowledged the very real and serious problem of sexual harassment experienced by women. We know that the results of Cheltenham Borough Council's own Safety of Women in the Evening and at Night Time survey will be at the forefront of your minds, as well as the numerous examples given by objectors of the negative impact of sexual entertainment venues on the lives of women and girls in Cheltenham. We've been informed that the applicant has submitted details of various training events and meetings that the applicant and their staff has engaged with around vulnerability and sexual harassment, as well as engagement with Gloucestershire Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre. What this additional information demonstrates is that lap dancing is inherently risky for female performers, and by training those handing out flyers, a recognition that sexual harassment is not just a problem encountered within the premises. Most compelling of all is the fact that, despite all of these steps, Grassac still object to the grant of the licence on the grounds that, and I'm quoting from Grassac's original objection, sexual entertainment venues spread harmful attitudes that pose a risk to women around the area and create greater risk of sexual harassment or sexual assault. The committee now has the opportunity to show that they are listening to the women and girls of Cheltenham and can contribute to making a positive change which could significantly improve lives. By declining this SEV application, the Council will send a strong message that they recognise the needs of women and girls, understand the urgency of tackling harassment and abuse, and that they take their obligations under the public sector equality duty seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? So I just want to just come back with a question for you. So you heard earlier about the in the officer report about the exemption and what that might mean. We're effectively the legislative framework we're in at the moment means we could grant the licence and there would be 40 over 40 enforceable conditions. And it would be at one location that everybody knows where it is. But if we were to choose not to do that, the applicant could use the exemption and be at one premises on one night with no conditions and a different premises a different night on the other night, also with no licensing conditions. Which of those two outcomes do you think would be preferable for women's safety?
Well, I would understand that the applicant taking women's safety seriously would comply with all of the conditions that are usually imposed because he would recognise the value of engaging with the licensing team and putting in all the same measures that he already puts in under the licence to ensure that that all runs smoothly and people are kept safe. So that's my expectation of the applicant, and I would be very shocked if he wasn't going to do that.
The question wasn't about what they were going to do, it was which one would be preferable, one with an enforced regime or one with a where the licensing conditions are enforceable or one where they're not. Which one do you think would be safer?
Well, I think it's a travesty that there is a loophole. I feel that there is an issue there, isn't there? There is a major issue that needs addressing, and I would hope that the council would be working to close that loophole in any way that they can influence those changes to ensure that there is a regime that keeps the women working and women in the community safe.
Thank you. Right, and are there any other questions? No. Oh, Councillor Wheeler, sorry.
I don't know whether this is actually a question or something I should leave to the debate, but...
Well, Well, think about it carefully, potentially. That's my guidance. Think carefully before you speak.
Right. I was going to say, listening to all the objections, and yes, I do have a lot of sympathy with the objections that all the speakers to date have made, but I think these refer more to perhaps speaking to our MP and getting something done that way, rather than things that we could do.
I think that's a matter for either debate or, as we, rather than a question to the objector. Okay, if I move on, if I could now ask Marina Fontenla to address the committee, please.
So I'm here on behalf of the Nelson Trust, and I just wanted to...
Sorry, can I get you to just tell us which objection number you... 8.
Yes. I just want to say that there is evidence to link lap dancing to the selling of sex. I just wanted people to know, because I think at the beginning it was talked about. We do work with women that have vulnerabilities, and some of those women are involved in the sex trade. So we have lots of first-hand experience supporting these women to exit the sex trade if they so desire. But what I wanted to really ask you about, well, ask you about is, we are aware of the Cheltenham Borough Council's intention to develop a pledge for women's safety, which was linked to the findings of your safety of women in the evening and that nighttime survey of 2021. This highlighted that the impact of sexual harassment on the life of women and girls in the community. However, it's not clear what progress has been made in this regard. I don't know if you are aware, and we did not mention this in our objection, but we have in the council a violence against women partnership, where the council representatives, the police, charities, academics get together to try and tackle male violence against women. And this is something that is getting off the ground, which is also related to what's happened with police reporting and how women are being treated. So this is sort of, the meeting is happening in this building. We, alongside that, there's also, pardon me, I'm really, really nervous. We do have another, in September last year, our Alex Chalk, our MP, and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, Chris Nelson, actually were successful in getting a grant for, from the Home Office for Safer Streets, that is trying to tackle violence against women and also antisocial behaviour. My point of this and my question to you is, given that Cheltenham is trying to actually tackle male violence against women in every way it can, how does that actually work with the decisions that are made by this committee? How is the council pulling in different directions potentially, given that in this very building, sexual entertainment venues are actually being approved?
If you can turn them right. I think the licensing officer would like to address part of that point.
Yeah, there was something that I was going to come back at the very end of the whole meeting, just to pick up one or two things that have already been said, but on something that you've mentioned there. Cheltenham Borough Council has to act in the interest of its residents, and it has to act in the public interest. And a big part of that is following the law, okay? This is a legal process that's defined by legislation. The Police and Crime Commissioner basically sat in this room within the last couple of years and basically suggested we should forget what the law means and make it up as we go along, or something along those lines. The council is bound by legislation and has to follow what the legislation says. It has very clear grounds why it can grant an application and why it can't grant an application. And if we don't follow those rules, if we don't follow the law, then we open ourselves up to appeal, which we would be likely to lose if we don't follow the law. And so the council comes back to that question of the council having to act in the public interest. However it might feel about a given issue, about a given activity, it has to follow the law. And the law allows this activity to take place. There's an application process to go through, and you know, the council will consider that case properly and fairly, but it has to make a proper legally supportable decision. I hope that sort of picks some of that up a little bit.
Thank you. Right, are there any members who want to ask any questions of the objector? Councillor Seacombe.
The last speaker mentioned working with vulnerable women and implied that they were involved in the sex trade. Do you know for definite that any of the people you're talking about have been involved in the SEVs in this establishment in the past?
I would quote research. Obviously, we cannot take generalize from one case, 2 cases, 3 cases, but there is research from the Home Office, which has been. Oh,
That would be defamation, surely.
I couldn't even. I couldn't. You know, there's confidentiality that I am bounded by, anyways. But yeah, there is research that you could look at that does link lap dancing with.
So I think the general gist is that there's no evidence, direct evidence being presented, and that the objectors probably couldn't present that, certainly not in this arena. So I think we probably might need to be careful with that direction of questioning. Are there any further questions? No. And finally, I've got Gilly from Grassack, if you would like to address the committee.
Correct. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Gilly Appleby from Grassack. As I say, other objectors have covered lots of the areas. My objection was number 9, as you'd asked. So as per my written objection, we know that there is evidence relating to sexual entertainment venues, and that there is a rise in disorder around those venues, and that's supported by anecdotal evidence as well as your own research as a council, and in terms of your own questionnaire. I guess, or survey rather, I guess the bit that I'm finding really difficult to get my head round, and as per my objection, is the fact that we have Gloucestershire OPCC, who have developed a strategy in partnership with charities such as ourselves and other organisations across the county, who've just released their sexual violence strategy, and our own work that has just been funded by the Home Office, which is around engaging with the public, engaging with young men, engaging with school pupils, with the universities, and changing the conversation around how you relate to women in terms of misogyny, in terms of healthy relationships, and with regards bystander intervention. And the awarding of these licences, and I hear everything you say, but the awarding these licences just seems to be completely incongruous with what we've got other organisations, both statutory and charitable, in the county that are working towards. I hear your comment about being that you represent public interest. Question how much public interest there is in the SEVs in Cheltenham that we're talking about. So those are my main issues, really. We know that there is a link in terms of the safety that women and children feel, or women and girls rather, feel because of these activities that go on and venues that go on in the town. And I suppose I would ask the council to be bold and be brave and represent the safety of women and girls. Thank you very much.
Can you? So, finally, are there any questions from members for the objector? So I'll just go down the same question as previously. So you heard what the what would happen if it wasn't licensed, i.e. the applicant has the opportunity to use the exemption. And again, which one of those choices, and I know that's not a choice, but that's the realpolitik, which one of those would you prefer? Licensed in one location with 40 enforceable conditions, or potentially at 2 different venues with no enforceable conditions?
No, well, you know I don't like either of the choices, don't you? Any more than any of us do. But that's why other councils have made brave decisions around not allowing them and making a statement in terms of their lack of support.
Thank you. So I've had a request that before we move on to hearing from the supporters, or those wishing to speak in favour, that we adjourn for a moment so that people can either take a comfort break, get some water, etc. So if we can pause and come back, I'm looking at that at just before 5 past. So if we can restart at 10 past, and I think based on the timing we've got, that's been about half an hour, if that's sufficient for your presentation. So I'll pause there. Right, everyone is back in their places. Welcome back. So at this point, I would like to ask one of our speakers in favour of the venue, who will be referred to as guest number 1, to address the committee. This speaker won't be shown on the video for those watching on the webcast.
Hiya. I'm going to go slowly because I'm a little nervous. I have worked for Eroticats for many years, both as a performer and as my current position, which is senior house mother. I completely support any event or licence that Mr Burrows hosts, and I can say my experience has been nothing but positive. I've worked all over the country in many clubs, and I would say that Eroticats is the most organised, safe, enjoyable company to work for and with, second to none. Performers are well looked after personally by myself and all of the team, which is why they continue to return year after year. Allowing this licence would mean that the dancers can return to a place they know and like. Without licensed venues, it removes that added layer of safety and reassurance that everything is above board and regulated. I would like to say that as dancers, we are often judged and portrayed in the media and by the media. We are being spoken for and not to enough. Sorry, we've been spoken for and not to. And we feel like our voices don't matter when ultimately, when it comes to our welfare, our safety and our choices and how we earn our money, ours should be the only ones that matter. In the early days of Eroticats, I remember moving from venue to venue each night and having to navigate different space each night is stressful. Granting this licence would be only be positive for the dancers and the staff, in my opinion.
Brilliant. Thank you. Are there any questions from members for the speaker? Councillor Boyce.
My question is similar to the one that I asked of the licensing officer. Have you ever experienced any signs of discrimination, inequality, or coercive behaviour in your time of working for Mr Burrows in any of his venues?
No, if I had, I wouldn't be here. I feel strongly about those things myself.
Thank you. I've just got one question, which is, well, it's a two-part question, but when you're working there, do you feel safe? And is there anything that you think we could or should do in terms of things that we might be able to put licensing conditions on that would make you or other performers feel safer?
So for the first part of that question, yes, safe at all times. I personally help ensure that as well. The second part, if I had more time to think, I may be able to. But to be honest, I'm very happy with the conditions. They're really easy for us to navigate, and they're relevant to the safety and the running of the event. It's, you know, it's not red tape rules. It's genuine. You know, it makes sense. So yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other members with questions? Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to put your point of view, because I think that is something that is probably not as often heard. So thank you very much for saying that. If I now move on to Phil Jordan, who wishes to speak as well.
Councillors, licensing and everyone in attendance, I am Philip Jordan. I am one of the owners of Under the Prom. I have been for 8 years. But in addition to that, I perform many voluntary roles within the council. Purple Flag is about maintaining and championing a safe Cheltenham. We've been awarded that for many years in a row. Night Safe, I'm actually the chair of. I'm very responsible for the refusals and the banning procedures for people who don't behave in the correct way. And the way that we deal with things like that under the prom is very, very robust. The bid, I'm also the deputy chair, and I'm very conscious about the prosperity of the town that I now call home. I have an impeccable record because I follow the letter of the law. So too do the operators that we work with in Eroticats. We're congruent in the way that we do things. The procedures involved are extremely robust. And to give you an example, for instance, for ourselves, the way we go above and beyond, our licence stipulates that we have 4 door staff working. Just on the weekends, we have 8. For the the procedure of this particular event will have more. In addition to that, Erotacats, they have their own security as well. Also, for the cameras and CCTV in our venue, our licence stipulates 16 cameras. We have 48, and Erotacats also add additional ones. Then also, our team is briefed very, very carefully on the procedure of Ask Angela, which is a scheme that has been set up to protect women, protect people, and make them feel safe. Although I must say that not all the attendees of this event are female, and I would say attendees of the event are male. I'd say 30% are female and 70% male, in my experience of doing these events regularly. We've worked tirelessly to manage the relations with our neighbours and other key stakeholders, and I feel confident. And I put my name to this event because I'm proud of Cheltenham and I'm proud of my business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the speaker? Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, do you ever find, I mean, within your establishment, you tell us that you handle everything very robustly, above and beyond the conditions that we put on you. Do you find that immediately outside your premises that there are anything that you are not happy with, that your place, you know, activities that other people get up to that might be because they know of your place? And obviously I'm only talking about locally to you.
Thank you, Councillor. No, in my experience, as I say, the process and procedure that we take care of in and out of the venue is very robust. I haven't seen any activity that makes me feel anything untoward ever happens. The policy of dispersal is something we work very closely with. We have relations with local taxi firms, and the procedure for transporting the performers or employees of the event is taken very seriously as well. So now I feel confident that there isn't anything that would prohibit us in that way.
Thank you very much. Right. Not seeing any more hands for questions. So at this point, I would like to now ask Imogen Moss to address the committee on behalf of the applicant. So obviously you've got longer to, because there's quite a few things you may wish to go through based on the objectors' comments. So over to you. Bear with us, we're just trying to get, you may need to sign in with the microphone. There we go.
Yeah. So I'm here joined by Mr. Stephen Burrows, who's the director of the applicant company, and he can also answer any questions that the committee may have. I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible, and I'll cover kind of the following main points really. So I'm looking at the grounds on which the decision can be made upon. The licensing officer has made that very succinct and clear in his report. I'm going to run through the merits of the application and also give a little bit of background on the applicant and the experience of Mr. Burrows directly, and also some of the work he's done within Cheltenham, working directly with some of with the council and with organisations. And then I'll look at some of the comments and the written representations that have been received. You'll have received some additional documentation from us. It's a variation application, so we're not obliged to serve any of this information, but I wanted to sort of give you an indication as to the robust policies and procedures that are in place. These will have been seen before when we got the licence originally granted in February, but I thought that it was pertinent for us to resubmit those so it was clear what policies and procedures are in place. Just wanted to touch upon the point about the refusal log no codes. Those codes specific to certain gender identification, ethnic identification. So some of those codes will be quite sensitive information, so that's why that wasn't put in with that specific document package. Just to remind everybody, it is a variation application for an existing SEV licence, which is to permit just 2 extra dates for November race week. And again, looking at the report, the grounds for consideration, mandatory grounds, none of these have been raised in any of the objections as being an issue. And then we've got the discretionary grounds as well. Variation, it's slightly different. Like Jason stated, there is no specific parameter within which to work within a variation application. However, it makes sense to look at the same discretionary reasons that you would look at a grant or a renewal. So I'll talk about the applicant a bit more when I look at the merits of the application, but I wanted to look at the locality. So the venue does sit outside the designated permitted area. However, just a few months ago, the committee determined that the area was suitable for an SEV licensed venue, and the use and character of that location hasn't changed. It's located on the promenade, which is a commercial area, surrounded by other commercial premises, and that includes licensed venues. And you'll have seen the map from our disclosures. It's like a stone's throw. It's 50 metres from that designated area, and it does sit within the heart of the core commercial district. In the SEV policy review, which was on the 17th of July 2019, another venue had already been granted an SEV outside of the designated area, and that was discussed. And members highlighted the fact that the policy is guidance, not necessarily law, and if the committee can find justifiable reasons from varying from policy, then it can do. The policy doesn't fetter discretion, and every application has to be considered on its own merits. SEV activity operated at this venue back in March with no issues raised. The police haven't raised any concerns and certainly haven't objected to this application. The purple flag status of Cheltenham recognises its commitment to a safe and vibrant nighttime economy, and the applicant is keen that the town keeps retaining this, and Philip Jordan has already given his comments on his involvement with that. So looking at the sort of discretionary grounds, so it's whether the variation of 2 extra days in the year, the 2 days of the November meeting, would be inappropriate given regard to the character of the relevant locality. There's been no changes to that since the SEV has been granted. The use to which any premises in the vicinity are put, and again, I can't see from my research that there has been any change to that would give any rise to any concerns about the operation of SEV activities at this venue, and the layout and character of the and condition of the premises itself. Under the Prom operates throughout the year as a nightclub. Upon grant of the SEV licence, an inspection was made of the venue by the committee members at that time prior to the application being heard, and there weren't any issues or concerns specifically raised on that point. A lot of the objections and the report obviously talks about the public sector equality duty correctly. But it's crucial to remember that the public sector equality duty doesn't require a specific outcome. The duty is to have due regard to the 3 equality objectives. So looking at the merits of the application, so the applicant, Mr Burrows, is a director of the company applicant and has managed the SEV operations for Under the Prom. The background details in the evidence bundle detail his extensive experience and wealth of experience in the nighttime economy, operating SEV events for over 12 years and held an SEV licence for over 6 years without particular issues or concerns. You've been an active Mr Burrows has been an active night safe member in Cheltenham for a vast number of years, and again has huge experience in working in the nighttime economy. Again, they traded the SEV race week at Under the Prom specifically in March for the 5 days. There are no issues that have been raised in that specific period of operation, and no concerns specifically linking any increase or crime and disorder to that Under the Prom SEV activity during that 5-day period of operation. I'd ask that significant weight should be given to the wealth and depth of Mr Burrows' considerable experience in running an SEV venue in Cheltenham, and also his collaborative approach of working not just with the council but also with Grassack themselves, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. Looking at the locality, we're looking at 2 additional days in November. You'll know that Under the Prom is in the heart of the commercial nighttime economy, open at night for SEV activity, and it's a wholly appropriate area for an SEV venue, as previously determined by committee members early this year. we ask you to attach weight to the fact that there is no significant change to the locality around under the prom, and there'll be no direct adverse impact on the community or other premises in that locality. What's of crucial importance is that there's no evidence before you that the operation of Under the Prom as an SEV venue suggests that it contributes directly to the crime statistics. It's simply not true that the operation of Under the Prom as an SEV venue means that there's a significant increase in antisocial behaviour or a rise in sexual assault cases in that vicinity. If there were any concerns along that nature, the police would be here robustly objecting to this application, and that just isn't the case here. I'd also like to bring your attention to the SEV policy review meeting of the 17th of July 2019 again, and the police stated there that they had not identified a correlation between SEVs and an increase in crime and disorder. Members also noted at that meeting that there were some crime rates, I think, that were provided to the committee members today. I've not had a chance to go through those in any detail because they were only sent to me today. But looking at that peak in March, inevitably members recognise that there will be a spike in crime rates during race week because you're having a whole thousands of people coming into the town at that point. And again, there's simply no evidence directly correlating SEV's contribution to increase in crime in that area. So moving on now to some of the key points in the objections. I don't intend to go through each objection in turn. I'm just going to address some of the themes that run through those objections. There's the assertion that the crime and safety of women is at threat. There's no direct evidence that I can see has been presented that this is correct. And again, I come back down to the point that if this was the case, the police would have made a strong objection to this and would have given crime stats and statistics that would evidence that. There is no such evidence here. And also, again, to be clear, the variation is asking for 2 dates in November. The venue has already operated during Cheltenham Cold Cup Week with no issues or incidents, arguably the busiest race meets of the entire calendar. There are a number of statistics quoted throughout some of the objections, and I just wanted to have a look at those briefly with you. One stated the 2023 Purple Flag submission stating a 50% increase in the number of sexual offences reported within the Purple Flag area last year. Again, just to highlight, there's no evidence presented in that report at all that this increase is in any way linked to SEV activity. Under the Prom operated as an SEV for just 5 days throughout the year and is only requesting an additional 2. It just can't be the case that the operation of Under the Prom for those 5 days is responsible for the entirety of that figure. Cheltenham has a rich and varied nighttime economy that operates 365 days of the year. Another statistic quoted is the respondents to the 2021 survey and the disappointing statistic, frankly, of women feeling unsafe at night. However, it's not one that can be laid solely at the door of SEV activity, especially when Under the Prom only operates on a very small number of days each year. And also then, you look at the rise during race week again, logic would prevail that you're having thousands of people come into the town for race week. There is inevitably going to be an increase in those rates and in those statistics because of the number of people coming into the town. Indeed, the report itself on the safety of women at night from 2021 that looks at those statistics states that the respondents to that told Cheltenham Borough Council that all parts of the nighttime economy need to take this issue of sexual violence seriously. And there are, you'll appreciate, many complex reasons for people feeling unsafe. Another factor of looking at SEVs and their impact on sort of the nighttime economy, the DCMS examination of witnesses back in 2008 when SEVs were being discussed and this legislation was being looked at. Chief Inspector Adrian Studd told the Commons Committee that clubs such as SEVs were usually well run and had a high staff ratio to customers. He said that it's true to say there's no evidence that they cause crime and disorder, or very rarely, because they tend to be really well run. People tend to be a bit older that visit these venues, and the alcohol consumption isn't to the degree of other alcohol vertical drinking establishments. Another key thing to think about with licensed SEV venues is the expectation of behaviour within these venues, and also arrival and dispersal is far, far greater than at your normal licensed venue. And I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. We've again spoken about the number of conditions, robust conditions, quite rightly so, that these venues have implemented on them and that are followed by the operator, and he's had this history of showing that we can operate within those conditions. There's inferences about behaviours, and I just wanted to touch upon that because that is a really complex issue and a complex point. But bear in mind, Under the Prom isn't going to have every single person that visits during November race week or during the March race week come into their venue. So the inference that all that behaviour is down to people having visited SEVs just isn't correct, and there's no evidence to those statements. In any event, the operator is actually really aware of those overarching figures and is proven to and wanted to work with the council and with organisations. And also bearing in mind that the operator does have an additional 20 to 25 members in the town with the tabards during race events, and that assists with the promotion of women's safety. And all of these staff members have had the bystander training, which was one of the things which was funded, that I think it was Objection 8 spoke about earlier. So they're partaking in that bystander training. The objections make reference to safety of women working in the SEVs, and you've heard from guest one about a performer's specific perspective on that, which I think is really important to hear. The Scrutiny Task Group in the sex trade in Cheltenham from 2013 stated that police advised they'd seen no evidence of a link between licensed and unlicensed sex trade, and I think that's important to make, given some of the inferences made within some of the objections. And again, bearing in mind this is a highly regulated business, it's a lawful business, highly regulated, lots of conditions that they have to comply with, quite rightly so. And the council and the police visit these SEV licensed venue, Under the Prom, a number of times during evening trade. And you'll see from the additional documents that there are management rules and house rules that are strictly adhered to, along with the conditions of the SEV licence itself. I wanted to address some of the comments about the courtesy bus as well, which was brought up by one of the objectors as well. This is operated for over 10 years and was initially created actually for the safety of performers. Mainly because if there was no availability of taxis, there's always an issue with taxis and taxi provision around race weeks or race events. And the bus is also operated later for customers, both visiting and leaving. Cheltenham races and race events attract lots of different people, visiting lots of different venues, and there have been occasions where the courtesy bus has been able to assist with vulnerable people and has assisted them with getting the relevant help or getting in contact with the police where necessary. It's a sensible and successful means of transportation to and from the venue. Moving on to the additional document you'll have seen about the work with Grassac, you'll see from that supporting information that at the grant of this SEV licence back in February, the applicant was very happy and very keen to work with Cheltenham Borough Council, and in fact a condition was added on there that it will work with the council to promote the safety of women in relation to race week each year. Now that's quite an unusual condition to have, and you wouldn't necessarily see that on any of the late night venues that operate under the Licensing Act 2003 on there. So it's just important to point that out, that there is a real genuine commitment here to work with, and it's a matter of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If we didn't want to work with them, we would have an issue, but then by having that condition on there, one of the objections mentioned, well, we're recognising that there is a problem. That's not the case, there's no direct evidence, but what we're saying is, as an operator, we want to work with the council, we want to work with organisations as part of the nighttime economy, full stop, to promote the safety of women within the town centre. The applicants worked hard with all parties, including management and staff attending the courses on vulnerability, anti-sexual harassment and bystander training, which was organised by the council. They've had an external trainer who was invited, and training was provided in respect of anti-sexual harassment to all staff. The operator has approached GRASAC to obtain literature for performers in the welfare folder, and also has said, we're happy to have your logo within our venue on any literature or any posters that you think would be helpful or useful for us to have within the venue. So I've given you a bit of a whistle stop there, and I'm obviously happy to answer any questions you may have, but my final points to you at this point really are that SEVs they're a lawful activity. Not enabling venues to operate as SEVs, first and foremost you have the exemption. It's not a loophole, it's there and it's written into legislation. It's there and it exists, and at the moment it's not going anywhere. So that is the exemption is a mechanic under which operators can have SEV activity. It is far better to have a licence that is a licensed operator that's known, frankly, who operates well and works well with the council, the police, environmental health and organisations, that has a history, a track record of good operation and has robust conditions, a large amount of conditions on there that they have to comply with, and they would be answerable if they didn't comply with those conditions. Not enabling SEV licences can stigmatise workers and make it harder to maintain or enhance performers' rights, and can disproportionately have a negative impact on the livelihood of performers and predominantly female employees. I think weight has to be given to the background and history of the operator of Under the Prom themselves, and their openness and their transparency in working with the council, with the police. And I think it's important to come back down to the fact that we are not asking for a 365-day-a-year licence. We are requesting a licence for 2 extra days during the November race meeting, and that this will not have any undue impact on the character of the relevant locality, the use to which the premises are put. It's a commercial district, and there's no question over the character or condition of the premises. And again, they were subject to a visit earlier this year. Unless there's any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions, or Mr. Borrows can answer questions himself.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any questions from members? So I've just got one question for you. Can you give us an idea of the capacity of the venue and the sort of approximate throughput, the number of customers you deal with on a typical night during race week?
Do you want race week or November?
As long as November is fine as well. If you specify which one it is, it's just trying to understand what the number of people that the venue can hold at any one time is the limit, and then how many people, how many customers you think you have. And it's not, I don't need it's a ballpark figure, not an exact one.
Yeah, the legal occupancy of the venue is 400. Our capacity, what we stick to, is about 180 for the venue. November, during one day, expect anywhere from 300 to 400 through the doors.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from anyone? Okay. At this point, then, so I'll read this out. Before we move to debate, I will remind members that it's important that you give due regard to the Council's licensing policy, and if you deviate from that policy, you give clear reasons for doing so. It's important you only take into account material licensing considerations and that your decisions are reasonable, proportionate and rational. So, who would like to start, or do you want me to start? Councillor Wheeler.
Yes. I think, well, to come back to the point I was trying to make earlier on and follow through with that, I do feel that most of the objections were against the whole principle of SEVs, not particularly this company, nor particularly these 2 days. That's not something that we can actually deal with. This is, the government has decided that it's a lawful activity, and therefore we're left with a choice, or one of 2 choices, as you quite rightly said earlier on. Either we have an agreement and a licence with numerous regulations, working with a company that we know and can trust, I believe, or we go down the lines of turning our back on that and allowing anybody to work a single night in a variety of venues with no complaints at all. So, yes, going back to that then, I do feel that maybe the objectors should be arguing with the government to change the law, because that's not something we can deal with. Then coming on to this venue, I think we already decided back in February that this was a reasonable venue, and we were happy with the operator to run a safe, responsible venue. They're now asking for 2 extra days. I don't see what real grounds we have to say, well, it's okay to do it race week, but for 2 extra days in a different part of the year, that's not acceptable. So I'm really struggling as to how we could argue that one. So in summary, I think, wait to see what other people say. I'm finding it very difficult to vote against this.
Thank you. Councillor Boyce.
Okay, I apologise. I've got quite a lot to say about this. I've been a member of this committee for a number of years. I've sat through a number of SAV licensing committee meetings, and so I do have sort of a strong background in these sort of committee meetings, and I think it's important that we explain our thinking, and I put a lot of background work into this and looked at all the objections and the support very, very seriously and listened to what everyone's had to say. We have to be mindful that a licence has already been approved for this entertainment to take place at this venue. I attended that meeting in February. We've already discussed it in great length, in great detail. It's been minuted. We've covered off on the statutory provisions, the CBC adopted policy, the relevant guidance, and any objections from the police. We also have to be mindful that Parliament has made it lawful to operate a sex entertainment venue, and that such businesses are a legitimate part of the retail and leisure industries. Also, the police, to my knowledge, have never objected or connected any crimes or crimes against women to this specific venue. We have to remember that the applicant chooses to have a licence with robust and enforceable conditions rather than operating under an exemption, which adds an extra level of protection for both performers, customers and members of the public. Public safety is paramount for this committee, it's paramount for this council, it's paramount for me. I have personally attended the venues operated by Mr Burrows on a number of occasions during the race weeks, and I have no concerns on that front at all. It's always very well run. And I'm really, really happy to hear this new news that you're working with Grassac. That's really interesting. That's good to know, and that it's in the information pack, and that Grassac information is available in the venue. That's brilliant to hear. So in reference to our reasons for departing from policy regarding designated permitted area, that was raised in the objections. This is in the minutes from the previous meeting in February. The venue is only 50 metres outside of the designated area. It's in a purple flag area, commercial area, where the proposed use can be regarded as a lawful part of the nighttime activity. There are no sensitive areas to the front, which is the only access point for customers for the venue, and it already operates a successful nightclub. I'd really like to thank those who have wrote in both support and objection. It forms a really important part of the democratic process and the decisions that we make. We take the public sector equality duty very seriously. It's good to know that the applicant is a member of BID and NightSafe, as well as the owner of the venue is very on the body of BID and NightSafe. Is really good to know, and takes his role very seriously. They both do. and have long-standing relationships with the police. In fact, I have attended the meetings between the business owners on race week, and I know that there's a lot of effort goes into those meetings and keeping people safe on the streets of Cheltenham. We have retained our purple flag in the town. It's stated as a safe place for a night out. Whilst, especially as a woman, I completely understand the extremely concerning wider issues of violence against women. But we have to focus on this application tonight. This is what we are here to do. It's our duty. But I would like to give some clarification and maybe some reassurances. I don't know if you will be reassured, but I'd like to try. Our Cabinet Member for Safety and Communities is continuously raising the issues of violence against women in her position on the Police and Crime Commission panel. As is correctly stated in some of the objections, the results of the 2021 survey were deeply concerning, but we have no evidence to attribute these crimes against women to the specific venue, and we must work with the evidence. As this activity is currently lawful, we must act within the law. As I said before, I ensure that I visit the venue during the race weeks and speak with the performers, and today I really have no reasons to be concerned. So, following on from the Council's position and CBC work on violence against women and girls, we had earlier this year, this is an update from the Cabinet Member, we'd earlier this year been successful in bringing some money from the Office of Police and Crime Commission, but they decided where the money would go, which was primarily into lighting a park and CCTV in the Minster Churchyard and Regent Street. Bystander training is being carried out, and a new survey will be coming out, and we are also encouraging the use of the Flare app. So work has been done on the back of the survey results, and in fact I want to read you out an update that I got from the Cabinet Member for Communities and Safety today. She said, Council Boys, as COVID changed the behaviour of people and the last survey was done in COVID timescale, we are running another to see what changes have been, or what changes have occurred. As far as the pledge is concerned, because you mentioned the pledge, I asked for an update on that as well, because it was clear that there hadn't been an update as far as you're concerned. CBC was hoping to get funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, but not all of our bid was taken forward to the Home Office. So work that was anticipated would be done cannot go forward. However, with regard to the pledge, what we would like to do is we'd add a part of the survey to ask what the public and what their interventions would be and what their priorities would be to be included in the pledge. So we are working with partners to develop a strategic approach as concerns about safety haven't been diminished. So I feel that as a council, we are doing everything in our power to ensure the safety of all people in our town and visitors to the town. I'm satisfied that we have regarded the relevant statutory provisions, the authorities' policy, the relevant guidance, and considered the objections and comment of the police and other persons. So I see no reason not to grant the variation to the application for those reasons that I stated. Thanks.
Thank you. If I come in now, I just want to cover off some of the things to do with the public sector equality duty. So some of this material is in the public domain. So, for example, there's an article in the Journal of Licensing, which is the Journal of the Institute of Licensing, number 33 from July 2022, which is entitled SEVs and the PSED, so Sexual Entertainment Venues and Public Sector Equality Duty. The article is online, so if you look up the Institute of Licensing, you can find it. And I think the applicant's list have probably read from the same text. But I think it's important to reread it because it's important. So the public sector equality duty can cut both ways, and it says it leaves local authorities in a difficult position when considering SEV licensing applications and the adoption of SEV policies. And it then says, firstly, it is crucial to remember that the public sector equality duty does not require a specific outcome, and the duty is to have due regard to the three equality objectives as set out in section 1491 and there is then guidance from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission on that. This article is available online from them. But I also want to show that we have thought about our public sector equality duty from the outset. So, as an example, the Council's policy documents on SEV are silent as to the gender or gender reassignment of the performer and the sexual orientation of the audience. And that shows that we will apply our policy equally to any venue, whether they had female performers, whether they have male performers such as the Dream Boys, or even a premises serving the LGBTQ+ community. In the original application for which this variation is being sought, the Council added a condition to prohibit customer access or egress via Montpellier Street. However, because the premises is situated on a lower ground floor, accessible only via steps from the promenade entrance, the condition deliberately permits access from Montpellier Street for those who are mobility impaired, recognising from the outset our duty to those with the protected characteristic of disability. There are some areas where we need to comply with statutes, so we can't allow anyone under 18 from going into the premises when regulated entertainment is occurring. The Council has sought to apply a Challenge 25 policy, where anyone who appears to be under 25 years old is required to provide compliant photographic identity documents that prove they are over 18. On one hand, it could be argued that to have equality on the grounds of age, everyone should be required to produce an ID document regardless of their age. But conversely, it could be argued that this is a disproportionate approach and applies an undue burden of proof or undue burden on the applicant if someone is clearly over the age of 18. We have to give due regard to case law, so Newcastle upon Tyne City Council and the Christian Institute, where it's made clear that we can't take into account objections on moral grounds. And were that not the case, it isn't just sexual entertainment venue licences. There could be other objections to various licensable activities, such as the sale of alcohol, for those with a belief that alcohol should not be permitted, the regulation of gambling, and other types of sex establishment. They could all be blocked. So that engages public sector equality considerations around religion or belief. But since Parliament has legislated to make the activity lawful, the consideration of due regard seems to allow decision makers to accept that these concerns exist, but still conclude that the licensable activity may be acceptable. Many of the objectors raise the public sector equality duty in regard of the protected characteristic of sex, relating to female performers, other female staff working in the premises, females seeking to go about their normal daily life in the vicinity of the premises or the town as a whole. Weighing these representations, the Council needs to consider whether a venue operating for 2 extra nights, so a total of 7 nights out of 365, will have the discriminatory effect suggested by the objectors. This consideration extends to whether the cause of the suggested issues is due to the presence of sexual entertainment venues, or whether it is due to the influx of tens of thousands of extra people, many of whom have gone nowhere near the licensed SEV, which is why I asked about the number of the capacity and the throughput in terms of customers, and they may have won considerable amounts of money via licensed gambling and consumed alcohol. The objectors seem to hold that the presence of SEV and the applicant's legitimate business operations are responsible for many ills associated with Race Week, based predominantly on generalisations. And the weight that we must give that is something for the committee to weigh. The further consideration is the degree of responsibility the applicant has versus the personal responsibility of customers. So while the applicant can significantly influence who is allowed into the premises and their conduct whilst there, it would seem incredibly difficult in law to attribute events occurring away from the venue outside of the control or influence of the applicant to the premises. The Council also needs to consider whether by allowing male performers to operate under the exemption at council-owned premises, Cheltenham Town Hall, but by refusing the licence for female performers at the applicant's premises, it could in fact be discriminating against the performers on the basis of their sex. The council needs to consider the impact of the exemption on its decision-making process. If the council refuses the variation, then it seems highly likely that the applicant will make use of the exemption at the premises potentially at this premises for one of the requested nights, and a second night at a different premises elsewhere in the town. In that case, neither night would the performers, the customers or the public benefit from the additional protections afforded by the grant of a sexual entertainment venue licence containing at least 40 enforceable conditions, and that could potentially discriminate against performers and others by making them less safe because there is less regulation. And the committee would need to weigh whether the uncertainty of where the activity is occurring and the movement of the activity on different nights actually makes it more difficult for those who wish to avoid such premises to do so, therefore having a detrimental impact on public safety. I've gone through the representations in objection in quite significant detail, and I have written documents, but I don't think everyone wants me to read those out because that would be quite a long process. Going through the reasons we could refuse, none of the mandatory grounds for refusal seem to be engaged, to my mind, because if they were, it would have been refused by officers under delegated powers. So we come down to the discretionary grounds. There's no evidence that the applicant is unsuitable, and in fact there's testimony from supporters, which we can't give a lot of weight to, and I note that some of those were duplicates, to say that the applicant, that the character of the applicant is good, and therefore to rebut any refusal on grounds A. Grounds B is that it would be effectively a licence issued by proxy, and there's no evidence to support that. Councillor Boyce has already dealt with our view on ground C from the previous meeting, so I don't feel a need to reiterate that. And then we come down to the grant on grounds D, the character of the locality, the use to which premises are put, and the layout. We've inspected it, so the layout questions are not relevant, and I think we've considered the other two items. My personal view is that it is safer to be licensed than to operate potentially under any exemption. Finally, I want to just address some of the people who claim to have objected and actually haven't. So the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner have made no objection, as far as I am aware. There was no headed paper from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner on this occasion. And the Member of Parliament has made no objection. It is perfectly within their capability to object, to turn up and to speak. In terms of what was read out earlier about what the Member of Parliament said, so I have a letter dated the 21st of September 2020 from the Home Office, from the Minister Victoria Atkins MP, which I will try and read the relevant part if I can find it. So it talks about the exemption, which is set out in the Police and Crime Act 2009. And it says, and I'll quote directly, "The intent of the legislation is to strike a balance between nuisance to the community and the reduction of onerous regulation being placed on small businesses." And it also says that they have no immediate plans to amend the legislation surrounding the licensing of sexual entertainment venues. To further cover that, our MP on the 15th of January 2020 tabled a written question, which you can find in Hansard, to ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department whether the government has plans to review the current policy on sexual entertainment licences that allow for venues to operate pop-up sexual entertainment venues. And the answer was, We currently have no plans to amend the legislation surrounding the licensing of sexual entertainment venues. However, we routinely review local licensing regulations and we continue to work with the police to make sure that public nuisance issues are being tackled. This committee, and in fact, we asked another Member of Parliament, the late Lord Jones of Cheltenham, whether the government would consider national minimum conditions for any unlicensed sexual entertainment provided in accordance with the exemption under paragraph 2A brackets 3 brackets B of Schedule 3 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982, and that there is a very long answer which doesn't seem to answer the question but suggests that the government have no plans to do that. Our MP is a minister in government. If he wants to change the law, he is best placed to do that, and the fact that he has asked someone else to read a representation and has not objected himself is, well, it's difficult to address. I think I would say if he wants to come to object, he should come here himself. Right. I ought to check, are there any further comments from members? Okay. So I need to make sure that the licensing officer and the legal officer are happy with that we've covered off reasons.
It was just really linked to the final right reply. It was just to pull a couple of things together that had been mentioned earlier on. And it was something that, about the public sector equality duty, obviously the discussion up until now has very much been that the granting of this licence will be a bad thing in relation to the public sector equality duty. You could actually take a different perspective, and people may not necessarily agree with this, but you could take another perspective that actually if the council has an application that with a few or no reasons where it should actually refuse that licence, that actually the public sector equality duty is potentially being promoted better by having a licensed venue versus unlicensed venues in the same town with no regulation. It was just something that came to mind whilst that discussion was taking place, and also the fact, obviously, that the role of the leafleters was mentioned, and it was suggested that the leafleters that go around the town, they're obviously doing what they do because there's a perceived risk in the business that's being operated. I do think we do have to be a bit cautious about that. That's you know, through work that's been going on over the last sort of year or so, those leafleters are, I would really hope, playing quite a crucial practical role in trying to promote women's safety. In most cases, quite a long way away from the venue. They have been given training, and that process is obviously ongoing in terms of bystander training. You know, myself and our licensing team have actually done that, like that bystander training, and I feel better equipped to see if there was an issue going on in the town. I feel better equipped to deal with that, and I'd hope those leafleters would as well. So I wouldn't want to see that used as a negative in the context of this, because I'd hope that that is something that can actually promote women's safety. And that was all I was going to add.
Thank you. And can I just check you're legal happy? Brilliant. So before we move to decision making, I need to give the applicant final right of reply in case there's anything that you think we've missed, not covered, etc.
Thank you, Chair. I think all of the points that you've raised there are of crucial importance. And again, it's just making and reiterating the point that SEVs are a lawful activity. You've heard from a performer today about their view on their legitimate activity. You've heard their view on the applicant. We have a history with this applicant proven from not only operating under the exemption, but crucially under an SEV licence earlier this year, successfully and safely. And I think weight needs to be given to that, and significant weight needs to be given to the transparency, the openness and the willingness to work with the council, with the police, with organisations. And I don't really want to repeat myself, but just to make it clear, the applicant is requesting just 2 additional days during November. they already have to comply with all those significant conditions on the licence, and weighing up the proportionality of the application, we submit that there will not be any undue impact on the character of the relevant locality, the use to which the premises are put, and that there is no question over the suitability of the applicant here, and we would ask the committee kindly to grant the application as applied for. Thank you.
Thank you. In which case, I will move to the decision-making part, which is which is at 7.6 on page 14, which is having considered all the relevant matters, the committee must decide whether to A, grant the variation as applied for. So can I have a show of hands for those in favour, please? So that is unanimous. The variation has been granted. And the officer will issue the decision notice and be in contact with you about that. What I'd like to say to the objectors is the council does take the safety of women and girls, the issues seriously. We have to comply with the legislation, and we can evidence that we have tried through various means to seek to get those with the ability to change the legislation to lobby for the legislation to be changed. Our MP is currently a minister in government. If he can't get that legislation changed based on his position, Secretary of State for Justice, I don't think anyone can. We want to work to make the town safe. That's why we go for things like the purple flag. We will work with, as a council, and in fact, as a committee, when it comes to reviewing policy, we will work with groups representing all manner of community interests, from those representing the interests of performers, those representing objectors, those representing faith communities. We will work with those, and we will take evidence, and we will do the best that we can to listen to what everyone wants. There will always be at least two different sides. We are at the moment bound by law. We have to follow the legislation, which comes from originally from 1982. I think we'll put that on record. You know, we do want to work for the safety of everybody in our town, regardless of what protected characteristics when they go out, and who that, you know, irrespective of anything. And we are more than happy to work with people and have representations come to licensing outside of these hearings, where the issues can be discussed in a sort of less contentious fashion. So if I move on to final items, there are no items needing a decision that are urgent. The date of the next meeting is the 8th of November, and at 8:10, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you all for your attendance and your participation this evening.